My name is Maya Hayes, and I am 32 years old. 3 days before my wedding, my father called. It was a rainy Tuesday. I was in my studio, trimming dried eucalyptus and thistle for the centerpieces, damp soil beneath my nails, a quiet acoustic playlist humming in the background. When the caller ID flashed, "Dad," I tapped the screen with my elbow because my hands were slick with plant food. 7 words. That was all it took. "I cannot walk you down the aisle." I set the pruning shears onto the wooden workbench, wiped my hands on my canvas apron, and stood in silence for 5 seconds. That silence feels endless when you are the one holding the phone. "Serena says it would be too much for her," he said. "Your sister, Serena, 3 years older, married with 2 children, and still the gravity around which my parents' lives orbit, even when the day was supposed to be mine. She is going through a very difficult time, Maya. Her marriage, you know how it is." I did know. But this was my wedding day, not her divorce. 10 minutes later, my mother called to finish what he started. "Just walk alone, Maya. Don't make a scene. Modern brides do it all the time. It's very independent." She said it with the flat, rehearsed tone of someone reading a customer service script. 48 hours later, 200 guests would turn their heads when the heavy oak doors of the chapel swung open. But the man holding my arm would not be the father who raised me. Welcome back to their secret stories. This is a place where we share real, unvarnished stories about family, the boundaries we build, and the people who actually show up when the storm hits A1. Drop a comment below with your city and the local time where you are watching, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story haunting. I grew up in Eldridge, Oregon. It was a town of manicured lawns, white fences, and neighbors who knew the model of your car, but never bothered to learn your middle name. Serena was the golden child. Straight A's, captain of the state debate team. Violin recitals where my parents sat in the absolute center of the front row. Cameras raised. My father introduced her at every summer block party the exact same way. "This is Serena. She's going to be a neurosurgeon." He spoke as if the future were already written in stone. I was the daughter who came home with grass stains on her knees. When I was 14, I built a rustic, cold, frame greenhouse in the corner of the backyard. I used salvaged cedar planks from a neighbor's torn down deck, discarded window panes from the hardware store, and a rusted latch I found in a junk drawer. It was crooked, and it certainly wasn't beautiful. But by August, it was producing heirloom chili peppers the size of my hand. That same autumn, my school's regional science exhibition fell on the exact same Saturday as Serena's state chess tournament. I had entered my soil purity project featuring a daily growth log and a display of my heirloom peppers. I won first place. By the time my father finally walked into the exhibition hall, the blue ribbon was already pinned to my board. He was 40 minutes late. The volunteers were already folding up the tables. "Sorry, kiddo," he said, glancing briefly at the ribbon before nodding. Serena's final round ran over. He checked his watch. "Good job. Though," he said, the way you speak to a stranger's child who happened to catch a ball at a game. That crooked greenhouse stood in the backyard for 9 years. I replaced the latch twice and patched the glass panels whenever the winter wind cracked them. My mother called it an eyesore. My father called it nothing at all. He never looked at it again. But those peppers kept growing every summer, regardless of who was watching. My high school graduation took place on a humid Thursday in June. That very same week, Serena received her acceptance letter to the Stanford Graduate School of Business. My parents decided to merge the two events into a single celebratory dinner at the Copper Hearth downtown. 3 toasts were made that evening. Every single one of them was dedicated to Serena. My father raised his glass to our Stanford pioneer. My mother dapped her eyes, whispering that she always knew Serena was destined for greatness. Serena smiled and thanked them for always financing her dreams. I sat quietly, ate my seafood pasta, and clapped at the appropriate moments. No one mentioned my high school diploma. I had graduated with a 3.7 GPA and an acceptance letter to Oregon State University's landscape design program. I had paid my own enrollment deposit using money I saved from running an amateur landscaping service since my sophomore year, mowing lawns, pulling weeds, and laying mulch for 6 neighbors at $40 a yard. When I told my mother about my plans to study landscape architecture, she set her coffee cup down with a sharp click. "That is not a real career, Maya." 7 words. She said them directly to my face, and as I later learned, she repeated them to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Adler, our neighbor 3 doors down, and the lifelong companion of my late grandmother Adelaide, told me years later that she had overheard my mother on the phone saying, "Maya is going to school for gardening. I honestly don't even know what to tell our friends." Serena's business school tuition was paid in full by my parents. $25,000 a year. I knew the exact amount because my mother announced it at Thanksgiving dinner as if she were reading a philanthropic press release. My tuition, I covered myself. I worked commercial landscaping crews in the blistering summers, managed the campus research nursery during the semesters, and took out federal student loans to bridge the gaps. Nobody ever read my debt balance at the holiday table. Serena married Dominic Cross 3 years after finishing her master's degree. He was a corporate defense attorney who wore charcoal suits and cufflinks that cost more than my monthly truck payment. My parents beamed at the reception, looking as proud as if they had personally engineered the global economy. Then came the children. Ava was born first, now 5. Noah followed 2 years later, now 3. My father retired from his accounting practice the same year Noah was born, and those 2 children quickly became the absolute center of his existence. He made the 45-minute drive to Serena's colonial home in Westport, Oregon, 3 times a week. He built a custom cedar playhouse in her yard. He read Noah the same picture book about steam engines 47 times because the boy threw a tantrum if he stopped. Serena noticed. She saw the leverage she held, and she used it the way an operator uses a control lever. The first time was over holiday seating. Serena demanded the head of the table at Thanksgiving, and my father quietly gave up his seat. The second time was during a professional family portrait. Serena wanted the photo retaken without me in the frame because my work clothes looked too casual. My father quietly asked me to step out of the shot. The third time, I heard it with my own ears. It was on speakerphone. My father didn't realize I was standing near the pantry in the kitchen. "If you walk her down that aisle, Dad, I won't bring the kids to Christmas. I mean it." Serena's voice was cool, measured, and entirely devoid of emotion. "It's just too much for me to watch right now. You know what I'm going through." My father didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. There was a brief pause, the sound of his heavy breathing through the receiver, and then, "All right, Serena, I understand." My mother walked into the kitchen 30 seconds later. She saw the look on my face and realized I had heard the entire exchange. Her response wasn't an apology. "She is their mother." "Robert," my mother said, turning to my father as he entered the room. "What can't push her on this?" That was the established hierarchy of our family. Serena, then the grandchildren, then my parents' absolute comfort, and somewhere far below the property taxes and the lawn maintenance, me. I met Ethan Mercer on a damp Tuesday in April 3 years ago. I was installing a native bioswale rain garden for a county drainage initiative along Highway 101. He was the structural engineer managing the retaining wall project 60 yards up the road. We both arrived at the job site at 6:30 in the morning. We both drank our black coffee from heavy steel thermoses. He watched me struggle to hoist a massive, dirt-packed root ball out of the bed of my pickup truck, set his clipboard down, and walked over without a word. "Need a hand with that?" "I can handle it," I said, catching my breath. "I know you can," he replied, gripping the other side of the burlap, wrapped root. "But my coffee is cold, and I'm looking for an excuse to avoid paperwork." That was the first thing Ethan ever said to me that didn't involve drainage grades or soil compaction. Our first date was a walk through an antique greenhouse restoration, followed by dry, rub pork tacos from a truck parked in an empty lot. He had work dirt on his boots, and I had soil on mine. It was the most uncomplicated, honest evening of my life. He introduced me to his father 2 weeks later. Vance Mercer, 63, was a retired metalworker and custom blacksmith. His hands looked like thick leather work gloves that had been left in the sun for 20 years. He lived alone in the modest saltbox house he had built with Ethan's mother, who had passed away from breast cancer 8 years prior. Behind the house sat a workshop that smelled of iron shavings, forge coal, and motor oil, with a radio tuned to a classic rock station that I don't think he had turned off since 1990. Vance called me kiddo by our third visit. By the second month of our relationship, he had built me a custom steel, framed oak tool chest for my workshop. The wood was planed smooth, the iron hardware hand forged, and on the brass nameplate inside the lid, he had stamped my initials, MH. It was small enough that you would miss it if you didn't know where to look. I run my fingers over those stamped letters every single morning when I unlock my shop. You've got real dirt under those nails, he said the first time he visited my nursery. Good. That means you actually built something today. No one in my family had ever said those words to me. Ethan proposed in the courtyard garden I had designed for the Eldridge Public Library. It was a crisp October evening, and the Japanese maples were turning that brilliant, deep crimson that makes people slow down their cars just to stare. He got down on one knee right next to the carved stone bench I had set into the pathway 2 summers before. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. That night, I called my parents. My father answered on the 4th ring. I told him the news. There was a pause, a 3-second void on the line, followed by, "Well, congratulations." Not, "I'm so happy for you." Not, "Tell me everything." Just the polite, empty word you offer a colleague when they announce a lateral transfer. My mother took the phone next. Is his family well established? She didn't ask if I was happy. She didn't ask about the proposal, the ring, or the garden. She asked about his family's pedigree as if she were reviewing a commercial credit application. They are good people, I said. His father is a retired custom blacksmith. Another heavy silence followed, the kind where someone is actively choosing not to speak their disapproval aloud. I delivered their wedding invitation by hand. I had designed the card myself, featuring hand-drawn botanical illustrations along the border and a single pressed fern leaf tucked inside the envelope. I drove to their house, walked up the paved driveway, and slid it directly into their mailbox because I couldn't bear the thought of watching them open it and offer more polite, empty words. I also asked my father if he would walk me down the aisle. He agreed quickly, almost automatically, the way someone agrees to hold an elevator door for a stranger. When I told Ethan about it, he did what he always does when I give my parents another opportunity they haven't earned. He placed his warm hand on my knee and looked at me with those steady, calm eyes. "You know who they are?" "Maya? I know," I whispered. "But I want to give them one more chance to be who they should be." He simply nodded. Ethan never tells me how to manage my family. He just makes sure I have a safe place to land when they let me down. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the ceremony. I was in the workshop, prepping the last of the eucalyptus and thistle centerpieces. 14 arrangements, each one hand, trimmed and secured. The radio was playing a low, steady acoustic track, and I was humming along when my phone illuminated on the cedar workbench. "Dad." I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. "Maya, I need to tell you something." His voice carried the exact tone he used when delivering a disappointing audit to a client. Detached, professional, avoidant. "I cannot walk you down the aisle." I was still holding the shears in my right hand. I set them down slowly on the wood, the way you set down a piece of antique glass when you realize your grip is starting to slip. "Serena says it would upset her," he continued. "Dad," I said, my voice entirely flat, "Serena is not the one getting married. I am." She says seeing me give you away would be too painful for her to watch right now. Her own marriage is falling apart. You know this. So my wedding day is about her marriage? Silence. I could hear the tinny sound of a television program playing in his living room. I'm sorry, Maya. I didn't scream. I didn't shed a single tear. I asked him the only question that actually mattered. Did she threaten you with the kids again? The silence stretched even longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed as if someone might be listening at the door. She told me that if I walked you, she wouldn't bring Ava and Noah to Christmas. There it was, the lever. The exact same lever she had been pulling for years, and he had folded immediately, without hesitation. His grandchildren traded for his youngest daughter's wedding, and he accepted the terms of the bargain without a second thought. All right, Dad. Maya, please try to understand. I said all right. I hung up, laid the phone flat on the workbench, picked up my shears, and finished the 14th arrangement. My hands did not shake. I almost wished they would. Shaking would have meant I was shocked by the betrayal. But I wasn't shocked. I was simply done pretending that things could ever be different. My mother called 10 minutes later, precisely on schedule. Evelyn Hayes does not leave loose ends. Your father spoke with you? Wes? Maya, please do not turn this into a crisis. Just walk solo. Many modern, independent women choose to walk alone. It's actually quite empowering if you look at it that way, she pronounced. Empowering? The way someone says organic when they are trying to sell you something they didn't grow. I asked Dad a year ago. He said yes. Things change. Your sister is in immense pain right now, and you aren't. She paused, taking a slow, deep breath, the kind of deliberate breath she took when she had convinced herself she was the only rational person in the room. You have Ethan. Serena has no one right now. I almost laughed aloud. The calculation was so perfectly typical of my mother. Serena's pain always outweighed mine, not because it was deeper, but simply because it belonged to Serena. Stop creating drama. Maya, this is not the hill to die on. I hung up, walked out to the back porch, and sat on the wooden step. The October air was cold enough that I could see my breath rising in the dim light. But I didn't want to go back inside. I held my phone in both hands and looked out at the garden I had designed and planted when I bought this house 4 years ago. The blue hydrangeas along the fence were fading into autumn gray. The lavender beside the walkway was dormant, and the birch tree I had planted during my first spring was now towering over the roofline. Ethan found me 20 minutes later. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there, staring at the cold screen of my phone. He sat down beside me on the step. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't say, I told you so. He just wrapped his arm around my shoulders and let the cold evening settle over us. After a while, I stood up, walked into the workshop, and stopped at the steel and oak tool chest Vance had built for me. I ran my fingertips over the inner brass plate, tracing the engraved letters, H, twice. Then I went inside and went to bed. On Wednesday morning, 2 days before the wedding, Ethan made breakfast Scrambled eggs with fresh chives from the windowsill planter he keeps alive for me, because for some reason, I can manage a 5-acre commercial landscape installation, but consistently overwater indoor potted herbs. He set the plate down, sat across from me, and waited. "My father is not walking me," I said. "I know," he replied, pouring the coffee. "I heard you on the porch." He set the pot down and looked at me. "What do you want to do?"
Not. I'll handle this.
Not let me call them. Just, what do you want to do? That is who Ethan is. He doesn't try to rescue me. He simply stands beside me and hands me the tools I need. I don't want to walk down that aisle alone. Then you won't. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes steady and focused, already analyzing the situation like a structural blueprint. My dad has been practicing his double, wins or not, since we got engaged. I watched him pull up YouTube tutorials twice last weekend. I smiled. It was the first real smile to touch my face in 12 hours. I can't ask Vance to do that, Ethan. It's too much pressure. Maya, that man built you a custom steel tool chest just because he wanted to see you smile. He drives 5 minutes out here on Saturdays just to oil your greenhouse hinges. He set a place for you at his Sunday dinner table 2 months after we started dating. And that chair has never been empty since. He leaned forward. He's been waiting for you to ask him. He just didn't want to overstep. The thought of it made something crack open in my chest. It wasn't the familiar sting of rejection. It was something warm and heavy. The realization that the father I had actually needed had been standing right in front of me for 3 years, forging iron in his workshop, calling me kiddo, and showing up for every milestone my own family had brushed aside. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll ask him today." My maid of honor, Isla, called an hour later. She is the kind of friend who will tell you your posture is terrible and then spend 20 minutes adjusting your dress to make sure you look perfect. She had run into Serena at a high-end salon in Westport that morning. Small towns have incredibly long reach. "Your sister was there?" Isla said, her voice tight with indignation. And she was making sure everyone in the room could hear her. What did she say? She was complaining to her stylist about your wedding, how stressful it is for her, how it's making everything about Maya again. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. Again, she literally said, and I'm quoting here, "Maya always has to be the center of attention." Ever since she started that little landscape design business, it's like the rest of the family doesn't even exist. I gripped the edge of the counter. The girl who won a regional science fair to an empty row of folding chairs. The girl whose graduation dinner was transformed into an Ivy League acceptance party. The girl whose career was publicly dismissed as gardening by her own mother. She also told the stylist, Isla continued, that your landscaping firm isn't even real manual labor. There it was. My mother's exact words, passed down to Serena like an heirloom recipe nobody asked for. Isla's voice softened through the receiver. She isn't angry about the ceremony, Maya. She's envious. You have Ethan. You have a business you built with your own hands. You have a life that doesn't rely on our parents' approval, and it is eating her alive that she can't control it. She doesn't want your father to walk you because it would be a beautiful moment for you, and she can't stand to watch you have something beautiful that she can't touch. I sat with that realization for a quiet moment. Isla is rarely wrong about these things, and she was entirely right about this. I should tell you about Thanksgiving last year. Serena insisted on hosting because my mother declared, "Your sister has the formal dining room." While true, it missed the point entirely. Serena's husband, Dominic, sat at the head of the table in a custom, tailored shirt, checking his phone 11 times during dinner. I counted because I was seated directly opposite him, and there was nothing else to focus on, while my mother talked endlessly about Serena's kitchen renovation. Serena was incredibly loud that night. It wasn't a happy loud. It was the kind of forced, performative volume people use to drown out the silence, stretching underneath their lives. She laughed at things that weren't funny, refilled half full wine glasses, and touched Dominic's arm twice, neither of which he acknowledged. Then 5-year-old Ava spoke up. She had gravy on her cheek, and she asked the question with that devastating, innocent clarity only a child possesses. Why does Daddy sleep in the guest house now? The entire dining room went dead silent. Dominic didn't look up from his screen. Serena's face did something I had never seen before. It seemed to collapse inward, not with anger, but with a raw, desperate panic. My father immediately cleared his throat and asked Noah if he wanted another roll, but I saw Serena's hands. They were trembling violently as she tried to pour more wine. I understood everything in that brief moment. Serena's marriage wasn't experiencing a minor rough patch. It was completely shattered, and instead of picking up the pieces, she was desperately trying to rearrange the decor to hide the cracks. My wedding was simply the next piece of furniture she needed to move to keep her secrets hidden. Wednesday afternoon, I drove out to Vance's house in Astoria, Oregon. He lives on a quiet dirt road off Highway 101. The house is a modest, brown, shingled cottage with a front porch he rebuilt himself, and a detached workshop that smells of coal smoke and linseed oil. The classic rock radio was playing at a volume that made it clear Vance believed Led Zeppelin was meant to be experienced, not just heard. He was in his leather work apron, the one stained with soot and grease, carefully filing the iron decorative hinges of a custom cedar chest. I stood at the threshold of the workshop for 10 seconds before he noticed me. "Hey, kiddo." He wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. "Coffee's fresh inside." "Vance," I said. He must have heard the tremor in my voice, because he set the file down instantly, turned his full attention to me, and wiped his black, dusted hands on his apron. My father backed out of walking me down the aisle. Vance didn't say, "I'm so sorry." He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't shake his head or curse my family. He simply looked at me with those steady, charcoal, gray eyes, the exact same eyes his son has, and said 5 simple words. "When do you need me?" No hesitation. No conditions. "No," Are you sure? The man was in the middle of forging iron, and in his very next breath, he offered to walk me into my new life, as if it had been written on his calendar for years. Saturday at 1, I whispered. I'll be there by noon, he said, picking up his file and returning to the cedar chest. Then, in a quieter voice, Kido, I've been waiting 3 years for you to ask. I cried in my truck all the way down the highway. It was the first time I had let myself cry all week. The next 8 hours passed in a blur of logistics. Isla coordinated the details with the terrifying efficiency of a general. She updated the chapel seating chart immediately. The father of the bride seat at the end of the front row was officially reassigned. The placard now read Vance Mercer. Ethan took his dad's suit shopping on Thursday evening. Vance had a navy blazer from a decade ago that he insisted was perfectly fine. But Ethan sent me a photo from the tailor's fitting room. There was Vance standing tall in a charcoal, gray wool suit, looking both incredibly proud and intensely uncomfortable, his rough, scarred hands extending from the crisp white cuffs of a tailored shirt. Ethan texted underneath, "He's asked me 4 times if his tie is perfectly straight." I wrote my wedding vows that night in my workshop. The steel tool chest sat to my left, and to my right was a hand. Carved cherry wood serving board Vance had started crafting for our wedding gift, thinking I hadn't noticed it in his shop. I wrote my vows with a pencil on the back of a blueprint sketch, crossing out line after line until I found the truth. My parents didn't call on Thursday. They didn't text on Friday. I checked my phone twice on Friday evening, then placed it in the kitchen drawer and slid it shut. Ethan didn't say a word. He simply made a pot of chamomile tea and set a mug on my nightstand. I never told my parents about Vance. They assumed I would be walking the aisle alone. Let them assume. The chapel doors would open on Saturday, and the man beside me would be my answer. Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding. I was organizing the floral buckets in the studio when there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Adler was standing on my porch, her silver hair pulled back into her usual neat bun. She had been my grandmother, Adelaide's closest friend, for over 40 years, and she was the one who had stayed by Adelaide's side during her final days in the hospital. She was holding a faded, yellowed envelope. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you," Mrs. Adler said, her eyes turning misty. "She told me to hold on to it until the week of your wedding. I've carried this in my desk drawer for 11 years. Maya." I was starting to worry I wouldn't live to deliver it. The edges of the envelope were soft and worn. My grandmother's elegant. Cursive script was on the front, to Maya. I sat at the kitchen table to open it. Mrs. Adler sat opposite me in quiet respect. The letter was brief. 12 lines written in Adelaide's characteristically direct style. "Maya, when you open this, you are standing on the threshold of the most important room of your life. I wish I could be there to see it. I wish I could tell your mother to sit down and let you have your moment. I wish I could tell your father to look up from his distractions and realize what a remarkable daughter he has. But I know how that family operates. So let me say what they never will. You have always been the builder. From that crooked little greenhouse to the life you are creating now, you make beautiful things grow where there was only empty ground. Do not wait for them to appreciate it. The people who actually show up for you, they are your real family. I love you. Go build something beautiful. Adelaide. I read it 3 times, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the small satin purse I would carry on Saturday. Family is the people who show up. Friday came and went without a single word from my father or mother. No text, no voicemail, no sudden rush of regret. The rehearsal dinner was held on Friday evening. Vance drove 45 minutes from Astoria, arriving 20 minutes early to help the caterers lift and carry the heavy oak banquet tables because he couldn't stand to watch someone struggle with a heavy load. 30 guests attended, all of them from Ethan's side of the family, along with Mrs. Adler, Isla, and several of the mothers from the community garden workshop I run on Saturday mornings. Not a single member of my family was in attendance. The renovated stone mill we had rented looked beautiful. The open-air patio was draped in warm string lights, and the tables were decorated with wildflower arrangements I had cultivated myself. Purple aster, wild Queen Anne's lace, and deep burgundy dahlias in copper vases I had found at yard sales. Vance stood up to make a toast. He held his wine glass the way he holds a steel hammer, firmly, with intent. "I'm not a man of speeches," he began, and a ripple of warm laughter went through the room. "Ethan will tell you that. But I will say this. 3 years ago, a young woman showed up at my son's job site and hauled a massive root ball out of a truck like it was nothing. I liked her immediately." He paused, looking directly at me. "I never had a daughter. I guess God just made me wait a little longer to get one." The room went completely quiet. Isla dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Ethan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "To Maya." Vance raised his glass. "Who knows how to make things grow?" I looked at his wrist, extending from his suit jacket. There was a tiny trace of iron filings caught in the crease of his shirt cuff. He had come straight from his workshop. He always came straight from where the work was being done. That was Friday. Saturday was the wedding. What I didn't know at the time was that, on Friday evening, 40 miles away, my father was sitting in his garage. Isla's friend in Eldridge saw him at the local gas station and mentioned it to her later. She said, "He looked like a man who was carrying a weight he couldn't put down, but couldn't bear to hold any longer. He sat in a folding lawn chair in his garage, staring at the pegboard wall. Pinned to that board was an old, faded photograph of me at 12 years old, holding up one of my giant heirloom peppers from the greenhouse, smiling so hard my eyes were closed. He had hung that photo years ago and had never taken it down, even though the greenhouse itself was long gone. My mother had made him dismantle it when I moved out for college. It's a blight on the lawn, Robert." My mother came out to the garage at 9 o'clock that night. "Are we going tomorrow?" My father looked at her. "I think we should." "Fine," she replied. "But we sit in the back row. I am not going to let Maya turn our absence into some kind of dramatic statement. My father nodded. He took out his phone and typed a message to me. "I am proud of you, Maya." He stared at the screen for a long time, reading the words over and over. Then he deleted every single letter, locked his phone, and walked back into the house. He went to bed without sending a word. At 9:45 Friday night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Serena. "I heard you aren't walking alone. Who is walking you?" I looked at the screen, turned the phone face down, and didn't reply. 11 minutes later, Isla sent me a screenshot. Serena had texted her, "Do you know who is walking Maya tomorrow?" She's ignoring my texts. Isla's reply was a single period, nothing else. I loved her for that. Serena called my father next. I know this because my father texted Ethan, not me, but Ethan. At 10:15 p.m., Ethan showed me the screen. Serena is very upset. She thinks Maya is bringing someone to walk her just to embarrass us. Maybe it's better if we don't attend. Ethan started typing a response, deleted it, tried again, and deleted that too. He set the phone down and looked at me. "Your father is asking if we are trying to embarrass them." At our own wedding? I took a deep, slow breath, held it, and let it go. My mother ultimately made the decision. Mrs. Adler, who has a network of local friends I will never fully comprehend, told me later that my mother had instructed my father, "We are going." I will not give her the satisfaction of telling people we abandoned her. Attendance as a strategic maneuver, not an act of grace. Then came Serena's final text of the night to my father, forwarded to me later by the same neighborhood network. "If you are going, then I am coming too." So that was the stage. Saturday morning, a wedding chapel, 200 guests, a blacksmith in a charcoal suit, and 3 uninvited spectators sitting in the rear pew, still convinced the entire day was about them. On Saturday, I woke up at 5:15 a.m. The house was completely silent. Ethan had stayed at his father's house the night before. "A tradition?" he said, though I suspect it was mostly to keep Vance from pacing the floor all night. I made a mug of coffee and sat on the back porch. The garden was shrouded in that heavy autumn mist where the world looks like a soft watercolor painting. The hydrangeas were spent, but the lavender still held its shape against the cold. Lavender always lasts longer than you think it will. I had 2 messages on my phone. From Vance: "Ready when you are, kiddo." Tie is straight. I checked the mirror 4 times. From Ethan: "I'll be the one at the end of the aisle who can't stop smiling. See you soon." I looked down at my hands. There were thick calluses on the palms from years of handling spades and shears, a faded white scar on my left thumb from a shattered glass pane when I was 17, and a trace of dark soil beneath my right ring finger that I must have missed during my shower. These hands had built a cold, frame greenhouse at 14. They had planted acres of gardens. They had worked commercial landscaping crews to pay for a college degree my mother dismissed. They had signed a business license, shaken hands with clients, and arranged the centerpieces for a wedding my own parents couldn't be bothered to support. I finished my coffee, washed my mug, and got ready. I pinned my hair up. using a vintage pearl hairpin Mrs. Adler had brought me. It had belonged to my grandmother Adelaide. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly who I expected to see. Not a victim of family neglect. Not a rejected daughter. Just a woman with work-worn hands and a clear, quiet plan for her life. I picked up my bag with Adelaide's letter tucked safely inside and drove to the chapel. The venue was an old timber chapel on a hill overlooking the valley. The cedar beams and stone walls gave it a timeless, grounded feel. I had done all the floral design myself, bundles of dried grasses, dark dahlias, and sprigs of rosemary. My grandmother always said rosemary was for remembrance. The altar was framed by a heavy iron archway that Ethan and Vance had forged together in the workshop. It smelled of pine and cold iron. Isla was already in the bridal suite when I arrived, her makeup kit laid out. "Sit," she ordered, handing me a glass of cider. "You look like you've been awake since dawn."
Close enough.
I smiled. She worked quickly, applying a soft lip color she called quiet authority. Mrs. Adler arrived shortly after, holding a small velvet box containing Adelaide's pearl earrings. She wore these to her own wedding in 1954. She whispered, "Something old and something borrowed, all in one." They were warm when I put them on, as if they had just been taken off a nightstand. Clara and my friends from the community garden arrived next. The room was filled with laughter and the scent of hairspray. There was no mother helping me zip my dress, no sister adjustment. Isla caught me looking toward the door once. "Stop looking at the door, Maya," she said softly. "The people who matter are already in this room." She was right, but the old bruise still throbbed slightly when bumped. At 10:45, there was a firm knock. Isla opened the door to reveal Vance standing in his charcoal suit. His hands hung quietly at his sides, thick and scarred from 40 years of bending iron and steel. He saw me in my gown and stopped. For a man who spent his life measuring steel to the millimeter, Vance was completely defenseless against his own emotions. His eyes filled with tears, and his jaw tightened as he tried to blink them away. "Don't you dare cry, Vance," I said, my own throat tightening. "I just got my makeup done." "I'm not crying," he muttered, clearing his throat. "It's just forged dust." Isla laughed, and Vance reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a small, hand-finished walnut box. Inside was a custom boutonniere made of dried pine twigs and copper wire. "Crafted it this morning," he said. "Figured store, bought flowers didn't fit you." I pinned it to his lapel. The copper wire was the same gauge he used in his shop. It was a piece of his daily work, built into the day. "You look beautiful," he said, then paused and corrected himself. "No." "You look strong." Nobody had ever told me I looked strong on a day I was supposed to look beautiful. And it was the greatest compliment I had ever received. At noon, I peeked through the side curtain of the chapel. Ethan's side of the room was completely full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, colleagues from the engineering firm. My side was smaller, but it was far from empty. Mrs. Adler sat in the front row, Isla, Clara, Gemma, and the mothers from my community garden workshops filled the pews behind her. Several of my long, short-term commercial clients were there, along with my accountant, Beatrice, who was smiling proudly. And then I saw the back row, far to the right, 3 figures. My father in a dark suit, staring intently at his shoes. My mother sitting perfectly rigid, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. And Serena in a dress that was far too formal for a country chapel, scanning the room as if looking for an exit. They had come. My stomach tightened. For a brief, foolish second, a tiny part of my heart whispered, maybe they came to make it right. Then I watched my mother lean over and whisper something to my father. He nodded without looking up at her, and I knew the truth. They weren't here for me. They were here so they could tell their friends they had attended. Attendance as an alibi. I let the curtain fall and turned back to the room. Isla was adjusting her bouquet. Vance was quietly chatting with Mrs. Adler. The coordinator stepped in. 5 minutes. At exactly 1 o'clock, the music began. A soft, acoustic string performance that sounded like light filtering through autumn leaves. The bridesmaids walked first. Isla paused at the threshold, gave me a reassuring wink, and stepped out into the light. Then came the silence. That brief, held breath of a room full of people waiting. The coordinator touched my arm. Ready. I opened my small bag, took out my grandmother's letter, and read the final line one last time. The people who show up are your real family. I slipped it back inside and closed the clasp. Vance stepped beside me and offered his arm. His sleeve was crisp, but his hand was the same, rough, warm, and steady. I placed my hand on his forearm. "You ready, kiddo?" he asked. "I'm ready," I said. "Then let's go show them what showing up looks like." The heavy oak doors swung open. The afternoon sunlight poured in, catching the dust in the air. 200 faces turned toward us. And there we were, Vance Mercer and Maya Hayes, a custom blacksmith and a landscape designer. Neither of us shared a drop of blood, but both of us were exactly where we belonged. I felt his rough hand rest over mine, steady, unmoving. He took the first step, and I matched his stride. We walked. I did not look at the back row. I didn't need to. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, where Ethan stood at the end of the aisle with tears in his eyes and a smile that told me everything I would ever need to know. This was my wedding day, and I was not walking alone. If you have ever found family outside of your own blood, someone who stepped up when the people who should have been there walked away, hit, subscribe, and stay with me, because what happened next is a moment I will carry for the rest of my life. 1. The Isle was 60 feet long, 60 feet of reclaimed pine planks. The irony of walking on reclaimed wood toward a future built with a man who worked with his hands wasn't lost on me. I counted Vance's steps. Left, right, slow, and measured. The same deliberate pace he used when working a piece of iron. The whispers began about 10 steps in, not loud, just the quiet murmur of people putting the pieces of a story together in real time. The guests who knew the truth, Isla's family, the community garden mothers, Beatrice, my accountant, smiled and pressed tissues to their eyes. The guests who didn't know looked at Vance, then scanned the room for a man who looked like the father of the bride. only to find a man in the very back row who refused to meet anyone's gaze. I didn't look at my father. I want to be entirely clear about that. I didn't turn my head. I didn't search for his face. And I didn't give him the satisfaction of an angry glance. I looked at Mrs. Adler, who was wiping her eyes in the front row. I looked at Isla, who was smiling through her tears. I looked at Ethan. He nodded once to his father, not a casual greeting, but a silent expression of gratitude. In the back row, my father half stood from his pew, caught himself, and sat heavily back down. My mother gripped his arm. Serena stared straight ahead with an expression of complete emptiness. We reached the altar. The officiant smiled. Who gives this woman in marriage? Vance cleared his throat. He is not a man comfortable with public speaking, but today his voice carried clearly through the chapel. Her family does, he said, pausing before adding softly. All of us who showed up. The room seemed to exhale. I heard Mrs. Adler sob quietly in the front row. Vance turned to me, took both of my hands, and gave them a firm squeeze. Go get married, kiddo. He stepped back and took his place in the front row, right in the seat that had been labeled with his name. The ceremony began. When it came time for our vows, I spoke the words I had written on the back of that blueprint sketch. I choose you, and I choose the family we build. Not the one we were handed, but the one we forge with our own hands. Every single day. We were married at 1:27 p.m. The reception began at 2 o'clock in the renovated mill. The band played a warm acoustic set, and guests began to dance. Little Noah, Serena's 3-year-old, ran between the tables chasing a rogue silver balloon. Ava sat on my father's lap, pointing at the dessert table. At 3, Vance stood up to make his toast. I'll keep this short, he said, raising his glass. Because Ethan told me if I went over 2 minutes, he'd cut my meek. The room laughed. The first time Maya came to my house for Sunday dinner, I had a dying fern on the windowsill. It had been brown for a year, and I had given up on it. She walked in, looked at it, repotted it in fresh soil, and told me I was overwatering it. He looked directly at me. I knew right then that any woman who saves a dying plant without being asked is the kind of woman who will save a lonely old blacksmith from eating dinner alone every Sunday. The room erupted into applause. Isla stood and clapped until her hands were red. As the afternoon went on, I overheard guests talking near the bar. She designed the courtyard at the public library, you know. Her firm manages the historic district gardens. She runs those free community workshops every Saturday. My work was speaking for itself, in a room filled with people who were there because they chose to be, while my own family sat at a quiet corner table, isolated. My father found me near the dessert table while I was cutting the lemon cake. I knew it was him before I even turned around. He smelled of the same pine cologne he had worn since my childhood. Maya, I turned. He was holding a glass of plain water. His eyes were bloodshot and his jaw was set tight. That man, he said quietly, he did a fine job. His name is Vance, I replied. My father nodded slowly. Vance, yes. He did a fine job up there. He did, I said. My father looked down at his glass, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't feel anger, and I didn't feel a sudden rush of forgiveness. I simply felt the cold, clear detachment of someone who had spent 32 years watching a man choose the easiest path. "I'm sorry you missed it," I said softly. "Or are you just sorry that everyone saw?" He flinched. Before he could speak, my mother appeared, her hand gripping his elbow to steer him away. Her voice was low and controlled. "Don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Mom," I said, placing a slice of cake on a plate. "I'm just cutting cake." They walked away. At 4 o'clock, we had the traditional dance, but it wasn't a father-daughter dance. It was Vance and me dancing under the string lights to an acoustic cover of "Lean on Me." Vance danced the way he built, cautiously, with his eyes on his feet to ensure he didn't make a mistake. "I'm likely to step on your toes," he warned. "I know," I laughed. 200 people watched a blacksmith and a landscape designer dance, and there was nothing but truth in that room. From the corner table, Serena watched us. Her husband, Dominic, was absent. On a business trip, she had told my mother. Her hands gripped her glass so tightly her knuckles were white. Mrs. Adler walked over and sat quietly beside her. Adelaide would have been so incredibly proud of Maya today, Mrs. Adler said. She would have been proud of both of you, Serena, if you had let her. Serena's eyes filled with tears. She set her glass down, stood up, and retreated to the restroom. She remained there for 15 minutes. When she emerged, her makeup was freshly applied, but her hands were still trembling. I didn't go to her, and I didn't send anyone to check on her. I kept dancing with Vance. Some doors close because you actively shut them. Others close because you simply stop holding them open. My parents slipped out around 5 o'clock, leaving the reception quietly during the cake cutting. The drive back to Eldridge was 40 minutes. I later learned from Mrs. Adler's network that neither of them spoke for the first 20 miles. Then, my father finally broke the silence. "Man built her a tool chest." My mother looked at him. "What?" "In her workshop. He built her an oak tool chest with her initials on it." "When was the last time we ever built anything for her?" "Evelyn?" My mother didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. My father said, as they drove along the reservoir, "When she walked down that aisle, she looked at Ethan. She looked at everyone except me. And she was right to do it." When they pulled into their driveway, my mother went straight inside. My father sat in his car in the dark. The garage light was still shining, illuminating the old photograph of 12-year-old me with my pepper plant. The greenhouse was gone, but the faint outline of where the frame had rested in the dirt was still visible in the grass. He checked his phone. There was no message from me, and there never would be. The wedding was over. A blacksmith had done what a father should have done, and the empty seat in the front row had spoken louder than any words. He turned off the car and went inside. On Monday morning, I opened my workshop at 7 o'clock. There was a new project file on my desk. The landscape design for the children's therapeutic garden at Eldridge Memorial Hospital. 12,000 square feet of sensory pathways, textured plants, and healing spaces. Ethan brought me fresh coffee at 8. At 9, Vance stopped by with a handcrafted cherry wood cutting board with an inlaid walnut stripe down the center. "For the newlyweds," he said, as if he hadn't walked me down the aisle 40 8 hours prior. My phone buzzed at noon. A text from my father, "Can we talk?" I read it, laid the phone face down on the desk, and opened the hospital blueprints. I began sketching the sensory path: rosemary for memory, lavender for calm, mint for vitality. The greenhouse I built at 14 was 7 feet tall and grew peppers for one family. This garden would be 12,000 square feet, offering comfort to hundreds of children who needed it. I drew the entrance arch, my pencil moving steadily across the paper. The morning light filtered through the window, catching the carved MH on the brass nameplate of my tool chest. Deep enough to last. I didn't reply to the text. I had work to do. 2 weeks after the wedding, Serena called. I was on the hospital construction site, measuring drainage elevations, when her name appeared on my screen. I hesitated, but then I answered. "Maya, I'm here," she said, her voice shaking. Dominic left. He moved out last week while I was out. He left a note. I stood in the dirt and waited. I thought if I could keep Mom and Dad focused entirely on me, it would fix the emptiness. She whispered, finally crying. Dominic wasn't there. The kids weren't enough. I needed to be the center of their world, and your wedding was in the way. Your happiness was in the way. I didn't offer comfort, and I didn't attack her. I simply stood in my work boots and listened to my sister finally speak the truth she had hidden behind years of manipulation. "Serena, I hope you find the peace you need," I said quietly. "But I cannot be your emotional buffer anymore. I cannot let you push me down so you have something to stand on." She cried quietly, and after a moment, I said goodbye and hung up. A letter arrived the following week, written in my father's small, formal handwriting. "Maya, I should have walked you down that aisle. I knew it the moment Serena asked me not to, and I knew it when your mother told me it didn't matter. I knew it most of all when I sat in the back row and watched another man take my place. I chose wrong. I have been choosing wrong your entire life because I thought keeping the peace was the same as being a good father. It wasn't. Keeping the peace just meant keeping you at a distance because I was too weak to stand up to your mother and sister. Vance earned the honor I threw away. He showed up. I didn't. I don't expect your forgiveness. But I want you to know that the photo of you in the greenhouse is still on my wall. I am proud of you, Maya. I always was. I was just too cowardly to say it aloud. Dad. I read the letter twice, folded it, and placed it in my desk drawer right next to my grandmother's. 2 letters carrying very different weights. I didn't write back. I used to believe that family was defined solely by blood. The people who shared your last name and sat at your dinner table. I don't believe that anymore. Family is the man who drives 5 minutes on a Saturday just to fix a greenhouse latch. Family is a worn letter from a grandmother who has been gone for 11 years. Family is the people who show up. If this story reminded you that family is a choice we make every day, not an obligation we are forced to carry. Please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to their secret stories. I'll see you in the next one.